1. Life interrupted, overwhelming emotions, distress. The emotional distress we experience in the first torturous days following loss or trauma can be utterly paralyzing. We might lose the ability to think straight or to perform even the most basic function of self-care, such as eating or bathing. Engulfed in emotional pain, we often experience every detail of our life anew as we are forced to live through a wrenching series of firsts. Our first meal without the person we lost, our first night alone after being victim of a violent crime, our first look in the mirror after the event that altered the course of our life. This endless array of firsts can keep coming at us for weeks and months. Our first trip to the supermarket after separating from our spouse without buying his or her favorite foods. Our first Christmas after losing our job without money to buy gifts for our children. Or our first Thanksgiving without our recently kissed parent. Every verse evokes memories, painful longing, and deep yearning for that which we have lost, and we may find it hard to care about what anyone or anything else plugged into the tap of despair. Our feeling might be darker even than those experienced by people suffering from the most severe clinical depression. However, grief is a normal psychological response to extreme circumstances, not a mental disorder. Regardless of how searing or our initial emotional pain, it almost always subsides with time. As we begin to observe the reality of our loss or trauma, the visceral pain begins to dull, even if by the most minute of measures. Indeed, time is a hugely important factor in our recovery. We often move past the most acute stages of grief and adjustment after 6 months, although such timetables are obviously dependent on the nature of the loss or trauma and is tangible as well as its subjective impact on our life. But when we do not, whether because the loss of trauma we suffer was too significant or because circumstances prevented us from moving through the healing and recovery process as we should, we risk allowing ourselves to become defined by our experiences. The most unique aspect of that made us who we are can become lost, subsumed by our grief, hidden from view such as that even we no longer glimpse them. Our interests, our creativity, our joy, and enthusiasm can all become obscured by sadness, pain, and endless rumination about the past, and our life become truly interrupted in every sense of the word. 2. Identity interrupted. How loss and trauma challenge our roles and self-definition. Grant was a sales rep with a promising career and a love for shooting hopes with his friend when he was not on the road. One winter evening, Grant and two colleagues were driving to the airport after a long business trip when the snow and icy condition contributed to their driver losing control of the car. Grant was dozing off in the middle of breakfast and when it happened. I went straight through the windshield, landed on the road, and lost consciousness. I came to a few minutes later. I opened my eyes and saw one of my colleagues lying right in front of me, death. I tried to get up, but I couldn't. I looked down and saw I was covered in blood and my legs were missing. Grant's shallow heart. This was our first session, and judging by the emotion of his face, these were not even Grant spoke of often. Next thing I remember is the hospital and the surgeries, many surgeries. Grant spent over a year in various hospitals where doctors treated his massive injuries and started him on a long road of intense physical rehabilitation. He also attended psychological counseling sessions. Grant's broken body slowly began to heal, but his mind did not. I can't tell you how many times I wish I had died that night. It would have been easier. People wanted to visit, but I couldn't stand the thought of seeing anyone. I couldn't stand the thought of seeing myself either. 6 years later, and I still cannot look in the mirror. When I do catch a glimpse of myself, all I see is a stranger. The person I used to be died that night. This new person, this broken body cripple, is not me. My heart ached for Grant, not just for the horrible injury he sustained, but because the 6 years later he was still in such a terrible emotion distress. The psychological wound inflicted by the loss and trauma he experienced were as raw as ever. His broken physiological bones had never been reset correctly, and as a result, he never adapted to the new realities of his life. Loss and trauma often force a new reality on our life that, depending on the severity of the events we have experienced, can completely redefine our identities as well as the narrative of our life stories. Before the accident, Grant had defined himself by his career, by his outgoing personality, and by his athleticism, but the three pillars of his identity were now completely absent and played no role in his life at all. Grant desperately needed to redefine his identity to reconnect with the aspect of his personality and character that remained buried beneath his grief. To decide what his life could be about, the challenge of defining ourselves and our identities accompanies many experiences of trauma and loss. We might have defined ourselves by our career and the loss of our job. We might have defined ourselves by our couplehood and lost our partner. We might have defined ourselves by our athletic ability and lost our health. Or we might have defined ourselves by our parenthood and seen our last child leave a home. In each of these situations, we need to take the time to rediscover who we are, to search within four things we find meaningful, and to find new ways of expressing aspects of ourselves that later on buried under an avalanche of sorrow. When we fail to do so, we are left with a terrible fault that only amplifies the extent of our loss, fragment our basic sense of self, and sets us adrift in the stormy seas of self-doubt and self-loathing. 3. Belief interrupted. While loss and trauma challenge our perception of the world, one of our most compelling human drives is the need to make sense of our experience in life. We each have our own way of understanding how the world works, even if we have never articulated it to ourselves explicit, and we filter most of our experiences through the lens. Our belief and assumption about the world guide our action and our decision that they often provide us with a sense of meaning and purpose. One person might often provide us with a sense of meaning and purpose. One person might view everything that happens in life as a God's will. Another might believe we reap what we sow. Some might believe everything happened for a reason, and others believe things happen for no reason at all. Some of us feel the world is generally fair, while others are convinced the opposite is true. And some of us believe life is largely predictable, while others revel in their belief that events are entirely arbitrary. Whatever token perception we have about such a thing, loss and trauma can challenge our basic assumption about the world and how it operates, and cause us significant additional emotional distress as a result. Our struggle to make sense of what happened often compound our initial shock and sent us on a desperate quest to integrate our new realities into a framework of fundamental beliefs that no longer provide us with the security they once did. Indeed, such a crisis of faith are common. We become flooded with question and doubt, and we often embark on a search for answer. The intense need to make sense of things can leave us ruminating incessantly about how the event occurred, why they have happened the way they did, and what we could have done to prevent them. We might analyze each of 1,000 small decisions and moments that, if altered, might have spared us the painful realities we now face. As a college is working in New York City during and after the event of September 11, 2001, I heard so many questions expressed by my patients. If only she had left a few minutes later, she would have missed her train and not been at her desk when the plane hit the building. If he had not moved to Boston, he would not have been on that plane. And if I had not stopped to look up, the falling debris would have missed me. Are all the examples of the thoughts and ruminations shared by many people on and after that horrific day. We often spend months dwelling on such questions as we search for a way to make sense of the event, while many of us begin making sense of tragedy within 6 months of it occurring. Many others fail to do so even years later. Yet the sooner we reconstruct our worldview in ways that integrate our experience of the loss of trauma, the quicker the intensity and frequency of our rumination will diminish, the better our physiological adjustment will be, and the less likely we will B. To exhibit poor emotional well-being and symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. For relationship interrupted. Why? We struggle to connect to those who remain. Maxine came to physical therapy to deal with her looming 50th birthday. 10 years earlier, she had promised her husband Kurt she would celebrate the milestone with him by flying to America and going on a safari. And Maxine had never left the country before, despite Kurt's many pleas for her to do so over the years. It was the 10 years in the future. But it still was not a fault. I'm unlikely. She explained, I fully intended to keep it. A few months after she turned 40, Kurt began to get severe headache. They gave him one test after another, but they couldn't figure it out. Maxine explained. Then they did a brain scan. The doctor told us he had a tumor. They would try to remove as much of it as they could, but basically they gave him 3 years at most. We cried at each other to sleep for night. Kurt was terrified of the surgery. He knew there was a lot of that could go wrong. Right before they wheeled him into the operation room, I promised him that as soon as he recovered from the operation, we would go on the safari, and that we would travel as much as we could in whatever time we had left together. We smiled for the first time in weeks. Maxine paused to wipe tears from her eyes. He died in surgery 2 hours later. She said, her hands trembling, tears now streaking down her face. I miss him so much. I still talk to him every day. When I get home from work, when I get up in the morning, I know this sounds crazy, but I even make his favorite dinner once a week. It comforts me, make me feel less alone. Maxine gathered herself and continued. I am here because my 50th birthday is coming up in a 6 months and I don't know what to do. A part of me feels as though I have to keep my promise and to go on the safari, but to do that without Kurt, to go without him, I'm not sure I could stand it. Max and Kurt had no children, but they had enjoyed a thriving social life organized primarily around their love for camping and the outdoors. However, in the years Kurt died, Maxine had lost touch with most of their old friends and she had given up camping and even hiking altogether. Her social network consisted of a two sisters who lived on the West Coast and a few casual friends from work with whom she had dinner every few months. When I asked her if she ever considered dating again, as she dismissed the notion immediately and explained that doing so would feel as though she were betraying Kurt. Many of us respond to profound loss by withdrawing into ourselves, obsessing about the person who died, talking to the person in our heads, and imagining his or her thoughts and reaction to our experiences. However, such phases are usually temporary. In time, we begin to let go of the person we have lost and move on, either by re-engaging with the people and activity that populated our life previously and by finding new people or experiences in which to invest our emotions and energies. But some of us become stuck. We maintain vivid representation of the person we lost. We hang on to the person's memory and we keep investing our emotional resources in the dead instead of the living. As another example, Cheyenne, a young man I worked with in the summer and fall of 2001, lost his first cousin and best friend, a firefighter who died when the North Tower collapsed. In the month that followed, Sam became obsessed with the Twin Towers themselves. He spent all his free time watching hours of documentaries and film about their construction, reading everything he could find about their history, and researching various aspects of the building maintenance and operation. Meanwhile, he withdrew from his large family. He refused to attend family gatherings and generally avoided the very people who share his loss and grief the most. While such a coping mechanism are responsible in the aftermath of tragic event, when they continue to long, we risk getting stuck in the past as Cian and Maxine did. In many cases, such a habit represents a breakdown in our grieving process. Instead of resetting our broken bones, healing, and redefining ourselves as our new lives anew, we end up adrift in our memories, relating more to what no longer exists than to what does. When left untreated, such pattern can persist for years and even decades, putting our life on hold and keeping our future tethered to the loss and trauma that have come to define us. How to treat the physiological ones, loss and trauma inflict. Loss and trauma can shatter the peace of our life, ravage our relationship, and subvert our very identities. To put the pieces back together to reset our broken bones, we first need to recover from the overwhelming emotional distress we feel in the immediate aftermath of loss or trauma. While the treatment in the chapter can help if the tragedy you have suffered is profound, if years have passed and you have yet to recover from the event, or if you experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, such as intrusive flashback, nightmare, emotional numbness, or jumpiness and agitation, you should seek the counsel of a trained mental health professional. Let's open our physiological medicine cabinet and review our treatment options. General treatment guideline. Loss and trauma create four physiological wounds. They cause overwhelming emotional pain, they undermine our basic sense of identity and the roles we play in life. They destabilize our belief system and our understanding of the world, and they challenge our ability to remain present and engage in our most important relationship. The treatment in this section are presented in an order that roughly mirror the sequence of psychological adjustment and recovery we go through as we heal from loss and trauma. Treatment A. Shooting emotional pain suggests guidelines for how to manage emotional pain and discuss common fallacies that can delay our recovery. Treatment B. Recovering lost aspect of self is focused on reconnecting to aspects of life that might have gotten lost and re-establishing a sense of identity, and should be administered only once we have returned to the normal functioning within the home, at work, or in school. Treatment C. Finding meaning in the tragedy is focused on making sense of the event and moving closer to finding meaning and even benefit in them. Treatment C should be reviewed first and then completed only after enough time has passed for our initial emotion pain to subside and we feel emotionally strong enough to do so. If you feel as though any of the exercise and treatment in this chapter would be too painful to complete, please review the section at the end of the chapter that discusses when to seek help from a mental health professional. Treatment A. Soothe your emotional pain your way. Working in New York City during and after the event of September 11, I found that the majority of my patients, as well as those who was mental health professionals, were personally affected by the tragedy in some way. One of my patients was killed when the plane struck the South Tower somewhere injured in the attack. Other homes were destroyed when the building collapsed, and several lost close friends or family members. While many of my patients spend weeks processing their loss and trauma, some of those who were most affected by the attacks choose not to discuss their experiences in a therapy at all. For example, one young man who was injured by falling, the priest clearly stated he preferred not to think about what happened to him that day ever again. Although many of us believe it is essential to talk about traumatic events after they occur in order to minimize the risk of physiological complications, such is not the case. Indeed, a wave of recent research has demonstrated that many of our most cherished notions about coping with loss and trauma will known theories such as the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The common wisdom, such as the importance of expressing our feelings and the danger of keeping them bottled up, are largely incorrect. For example, a technique called critical incident stress debriefing (CISD) is used by both military and the Federal Emergency Management Agency (FEMA). The techniques require people who experience traumatic events to discuss them in great detail as soon after the event as possible, under the assumption that expressing what happened and how they feel about it should minimize the incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder. However, we know much more about how memories, including traumatic ones, are actually formed in our brain. Specifically, the mere act of recalling an event changes our actual memory of it in minor ways. When we recall traumatic experiences while we are still flooded with intense emotion, we are inadvertently cementing the link between the memory and our intense emotional reaction to it. By doing so, we are making it even more likely the memory will continue to evoke intense emotion going forward. As a result, we risk getting vivid flashback and making the traumatic memories themselves even more psychologically central and emotionally impactful than they otherwise would be. However, that is not to say we should try to repress such memories or that we should refuse to discuss them. Indeed, most experts now believe there is no right way to cope with the aftermath of loss and trauma. The best each of us can do is to deal with such experiences exactly as our proclivities, personality, and worldview dictate. If we feel the need to talk, we should, and if we do not feel the need to share our thoughts and feelings with others, we should not push ourselves to do so. One online study began following over 2,000 people as it happened in August 2001, once the tragedy of September 11 occurred. The research realized they had a huge subject pool at their disposal. They decided to give the study participants the option of posting their feelings and thoughts about the event of the study website should they wish to do. Three-quarters of the subjects chose to share their thoughts and feelings, and one-quarter did not. The researchers continued to follow the subject for 2 years and were able to examine their emotional well-being over time. For people geographically closest to the attack, those who chose not to express their emotional had a fewer symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder 2 years later than the people who had shared their thoughts and feelings online. Furthermore, the more people wrote, the poorer they fared 2 years later. This result by no means suggests we should avoid discussing our feelings if we feel the need to do so. The best course of action we can take in the aftermath of tragic event is to do exactly as our feelings dictate. Those who feel the need to share their thoughts and feelings with others should do so, and those who share their thoughts and feelings with others should do so. And those who feel the need to remove themselves from such a discussion should avoid them as best they can. Following our natural inclination might be feasible, but it can also be challenging at times. Those of us who prefer to discuss our feelings and experiences might find it difficult to do so if we lack sources of social support, while those who prefer not to discuss their feelings might find it equally difficult if they find themselves surrounded by vivid reminders. It was practically impossible for those affected by the event of September 11 to avoid thinking about their experiences, as reminders of the tragedy were everywhere. For months, one could not step into the street on Manhattan without seeing evidence of the attack. The ruined building, the dust, the stench of burning material, and the picture of the missing loved one that were plastered on every wall, bus stop, and street sign, along with heart-wrenching pleas for information about their whereabouts. My patient avoided these reminders best he could at the time by burying his head in a magazine when he was on the subway, stepping away from water-cooler conversation when he was at work, and letting his close friend and family member know they should refrain from discussing the topic in his presence. Indeed, it is always best to let those around us who know whether we wish to discuss tragic event or avoid such conversations so they know how best to conduct themselves around us. For those who feel inclined to share thoughts and feelings with others, doing so can help us come to terms with the realities of our loss of trauma. Indeed, many religious rituals around grieving have exactly such a purpose in mind. For example, both Jewish Stephen and Irish weeks involve the gathering of friends and family to provide an outlet for the bereaved to express their feelings, thoughts, and memories while surrounded by sources of social and emotional support. When sources of social support are lacking, or if we prefer to do so, we can also write about our experiences or compose letters to the people we have lost, expressing thoughts and feelings we had not been able to share with the person before they died can give us comfort and even provide a measure of closure. Regardless of how we choose to soothe our emotional pain in the immediate aftermath of loss of trauma, the most effective treatment, and one that is available to all of us, is time. Treatment B. Recover lost aspect of yourself. When Maxine lost her beloved husband Kurt, the brain cancer is still a substantial part of herself as well. Her life after Kurt died was completely different from what it had been when he was alive. She and Kurt had been extremely active and enjoyed a thriving social circle, frequent camping and hiking trips, and countless evenings spent with the good friends. But Maxine stopped participating in all such events after Kurt died, and as a result, she lost touch with the friends and the activity that had been a substantial part of her life. Many of us are inclined to avoid people, places, or activity associated with the person we lost or with the traumatic event we face in the first week and month after such event occur. But maintaining such avoidance for extended period of time is problematic when doing so involves cutting out significant aspects of our life. Maxine lost touch with many of the very experiences and relationships that had defined her, and consequently lost touch with the important part of herself, relinquishing so many meaningful roles and functions altered her very sense of identity, and these losses were never replaced. She found a new interest and passion to fulfill her, and she met a few new friends. The void her husband's death left in her life was still as large as it had been almost 10 years earlier. Maxine desperately needed to fill these gaps either by going back to previous activity or relationship or by finding new ones. Many of us with similar challenges we go through our life feeling empty and incomplete even years after the tragic experiences that changed us. Exercise to recover lost aspect of yourself. The following writing exercise will help you identify aspects of yourself you might have lost by finding new ways to express this missing part of your identity and identifying new ways to recover meaningful roles you might have forsaken. I have included Maxine's response to each of the questions for illustration purposes. Cautious if the events are still fresh and the emotional distress you feel is still extreme. Do not push yourself to complete this exercise unless you feel physiologically ready to do so. 1. List your qualities, characteristics, and ability that you value in yourself, or that other value about you, before the event occurs. Maxine's list included the following: loyal, passionate, adventurous, curious, intelligent, leader, outdoor lover, expert, camper, bonfire, storyteller, compassionate, considerate, supportive, enthusiastic, loving, caring, and communicative. Which of the above items feel most disconnected from your life today or tend to be expressed less today than they had been previously? Maxine indicated the following: adventurous, leader, outdoor lover, expert camper, storyteller, considerate, enthusiastic, loving, and caring. Not that Maxine's list clustered around two aspects that had been central to her life before her husband died: her love of camping and the outdoors, and her love bond with a circle of friends who shared her passion. For each quality you listed, write a brief paragraph describe why you feel disconnected from the attribute in question or why the quality is no longer expressed as extensively as it had been previously. For example, Maxine wrote the following about why she really felt adventurous. I never thought of myself as a lone adventurer. For me, adventure was always about sharing new experiences with Kurt. What made it exciting was having the adventure together, having them without him does not seem worthwhile, and it even seems sad. For each quality you listed, write a brief paragraph describing possible people, activities, or route outlets you could pursue that would allow you to express the quality in a more substantial way that you are able to do currently. When I asked Maxine to do this, she struggled. She simply couldn't figure out how she might express her adventurous spirit without Kurt there to share the experience. You think I should reconnect to my spirit of adventure by going on a safari, don't you? But I really can't. Actually, that's not what I was thinking at all. I believe in taking small steps, and a safari is hardly a small step. Actually, what caught my attention about your list was that you stated adventures were experiences to be shared with Kurt, but it was not just Kurt. You were both part of the larger group of people who shared the same interest and passion, people with whom you might still share adventures, even if small ones. So here's what I was thinking. Which of your old camping friends would be someone you could see yourself going on a short hike with them? Maxine is highly noticeable. She had been so convinced I was going to press her to go on a safari. She was happily willing to discuss taking a short hike with one of her old friends. As another example, Grant had been very athletic and loved basketball before losing both his leg in her car accident. I pointed out that basketball was an extremely popular wheelchair sport and suggested he get information about local amateur league he could join. Treatment C. Find meaning in tragedy. Since Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning, it has been accepted that finding meaning in loss and trauma is essential for coping effectively with such experiences, and thousands of studies that have confirmed these assumptions. Finding meaning was a crucial factor in recovery from every kind of loss and trauma studied, from those with spinal cord injuries to bereaved parents of young children, from victims of violence and abuse to frontline veterans of war. To recover from our tragic experiences, we need to set our bones correctly and put the pieces of our life back together in ways that lend meaning and significance to the event by weaving our experiences into the larger fabric of our life stories. But the questions that arise for so many of us is how to do so. We might be aware that people with similar experiences reach conclusions such as, I came to accept that it was God's will. I came to accept that it was God's will. I realized I could help others who went through what I went through. Or I figured out what mattered to me and made big changes. But that doesn't tell us how these people reach their insight or how we might go about attaining our own epiphanies. Scientists who examine how people go about finding meaning in loss and trauma realize the process includes two distinct phases: sense making and benefiting finding. Sense making refer to our ability to fit the event into our existing framework of assumption and belief about the world so they become more comprehensive about to us. We are usually about to begin making sense of tragic events with the 6 months of experiencing them. Once we do, we are likely to have far better emotional and physiological recoveries. Benefit finding refers to our ability to wrestle whatever silver lining we can from our experiences. We might gain a greater appreciation of life and of our own strength and resilience. We might realign our priorities and identify a new purpose, and we might recognize the new paths that have opened before us as a result of our new realities. But benefit finding occurs only in later stages of our recovery, as it is not something most of us can or should do when still in the grips of severe emotional pain. That said, once sufficient time has passed, people who are able to identify benefit in their loss or trauma tend to display greater emotional and physiological well-being than those who are unable to do so. How to find meaning in tragedy? One of the most common way in which people derive meaning from tragic events is by taking action in a way that they are directly related to the loss or trauma they sustained. Family member or someone who died of a rare disease might start a foundation to increase awareness of the illness that looked their loved one. A survivor of sexual and physical assault might decide to speak out and educate others about how to avoid such experiences or how to cope with them if they occur. Veterans who have lost a limb in war often volunteer to help recently wounded soldiers adjust to their injuries and support them through their long process of rehabilitation. Many people who lost a loved one in the attack of September 11 became involved in the planning of memorial sites in New York, Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania. Of course, not every loss afford us this option, nor are they appropriate for everyone. The following exercise will help us identify new avenues of thinking that could make our individual exploration more productive. 2 exercises facilitate sense thinking. The first should be completed only once we have begun to recover from the initial assaults of emotional pain. The second should be applied slightly later when we are emotionally able to contemplate potentially painful what-if scenario. That this exercise facilitates benefit finding and should only be considered once we feel substantial recovery and stronger emotionally. If any of the following exercises are too painful to complete, please refer to the section at the end of the chapter that discussed when we seek the advice of a mental health professional. Make sense of tragic event by asking why, not how. We often struggle to accept the basic reality of tragic events when they first occur, and we replay how things happen over and over again in our minds. For example, Maxine frequently replays memory of her last conversation with Kurt. Natural as it is to do so when such a rumination persists, they become unproductive and serve only to reactive our emotional pain. Going over how things happen and replaying similar scenes tends to add a new insight and does not help us make sense of the event. But tweaking one important aspect of these ruminative thoughts could make them more conducive to attaining new insight and to fostering sense making. Specifically, numerous studies demonstrate that asking ourselves why events happen as opposite to how they happen is sufficient to trigger a qualitatively different and more productive thought process. Difficult as it is to answer such a question by asking why instead of how, we hidden the scope of our thinking and of our association and are forced to consider the larger essential spiritual or physiological implication of that event. Such bigger picture thought processes are more likely to have us find meaning in the event in time and to reach a greater measure of internal peace as a result. Almost 10 years after losing her husband, Maxine never asked herself the big questions about why Kurt died and whether she could derive any meaning or purpose from losing him. In fact, such questions were so foreign to Maxine's way of thinking that she seemed momentarily confused and disoriented when I first asked them. However, once she was able to begin giving thought to the question of why Kurt died, she found that she spent much less time replaying the event of his last week and month for Maxine's. Asking why opened the door to fresh and meaningful thoughts, processes that helped her move forward in her mourning after being stalled for many years. Make sense of tragic event by asking why, what might have been. Another feature of the obsessive thoughts we experience in early stages of loss and trauma is they are often characterized by fantasies about alternate outcomes. We ponder such a question as, what if the cancer had been found earlier, or what if our attacker had chosen a different victim? Some of us might feel that pursuing thoughts of what might have been can only focus us on the randomness of the event and thus make it more difficult for us to accept what is. But studies have found the opposite rather than eliciting a sense of randomness, though that consider alternatives to the factual reality we have experienced can help us feel like the event were predestined and meant to be, thereby lending them greater meaning. Much like asking why instead of how, counteractual thoughts force us to think more abstractly, to make connection between different parts of our life, to utilize our analytic ability, and to see the bigger picture. All of these are essential aspects of the meaning-making process. Such exercises can help us break out of rigid perspectives that limit our ability to consider the larger context of our lives so we can arrive at the first comprehensions and new perspective. Our natural tendency is to employ counterfactual thoughts to explore how we might have avoided the loss or trauma. But we can also direct our thoughts to how things could have been worse. Some experts believe the best way to extract meaning from a tragic event is to combine both types of counterfactual thinking and consider both that what our life would have been like had the event not happened and the ways in which things could have been worse. Thought exercise what might have been cautious. Readers should be advised that counterfactual thought experiment can be emotionally painful. Review the exercise and complete it only if you feel emotionally ready to do so. Further, those who do not believe in fate or predestination might not benefit from this exercise as much as those who do, and therefore they should not complete it if they feel that doing so will be either unhelpful or too emotionally distressing. For those who feel ready, it is best to complete this exercise in one sitting. Right and response are strongly recommended. 1. How would your life be different today if the event had not happened? In what ways could the outcome of the event have been even worse than the way they were? What factors prevented these worse outcomes from occurring? How grateful are you that these worse outcomes did not occur? When you have completed the exercise, give yourself time to recover and to observe any thought, insight, or fresh perspective that might have a full. Before moving on to the benefit finding exercise, you may also choose to wait weeks or months or to skip the benefit finding exercise entirely if you feel unready or unable to complete it. How to identify the benefits in loss. Finding benefit in loss and trauma once enough time has passed in an important way to ascribe meaning and significance to the event so we can put them in their place and move on with our life. Although it can take time to identify any such silver lining, doing so can open doors to path and opportunity that can become source of both meaning and life satisfaction later on, helping others who have had similar experiences, creating awareness about disease, societal problem, or other dangers, starting foundation in memory of those we have lost. Writing about the event and creating art and performance about them and becoming para-athletes are all examples of ways in which people have extracted benefit and purpose from tragic event. While identifying potential pathway for deriving benefit from tragedy can have a positive impact on our recovery, it is the real-world application of these benefits that does our emotional and physiological recovery most good. Therefore, we need to find ways to put any benefit we identify into action. For example, we may come away from a tragedy with a greater appreciation of our family, but if we don't take action based on these insights, the benefit we derive from our new perspective will be limited. However, if we make changes that allow us to spend more time with family members or increase the quality of the time we already do spend with them, we are much more likely to have truly gained from our loss and reap the physiological blessing of doing so. Exercise to identify possible benefits. When completing the following exercise, make sure you have the time and space to relax and let your thoughts explore various possibilities without feeling rush or pressure. Imagine yourself 10 years in the future. You have been able to achieve something meaningful and significant. You have a quiet moment to look back and reflect about your journey and how it has led you to this current moment in the future time. Complete the following sentence. I never imagined back then that such a tragic event would lead me to. What I did was significant and very meaningful to me because the first step of my journey toward the achievement was my achievement was possible because I changed my priorities such that changing my priorities led me to make the following changes in my life. Along the way, I realized my purpose in life is when to consult to a mental health professional. Yeah, when the loss of trauma we have sustained is significant or when it impacts our life in extreme or fundamental way, we should always seek the counsel of a mental health professional. Chapter 4. Guilt, the poison in our system. Guilt is an extremely common feeling of emotional distress caused by the belief that we have done something wrong or caused harm to another person. We all fail to live up to our own standards from time to time, and even the best of us can act in ways that often insult or hurt someone, inadvertently or otherwise. How common are guilty feeling? Studies estimate that people experience roughly 2 hours a day of mild guilt, 5 hours a week of moderate guilt, and 3.5 hours a month of a severe guilt. In some cases, guilty feeling persists for years and even for decades. The reason we don't walk around feeling incapacitated by guilty feelings is that we usually experience them for only a short duration. Indeed, guilt's primary function is to signal to us we have done or are about to do something that violates our personal standard or that causes direct or indirect harm to another person. We respond to this signal by re-evaluating our plan of action or apologizing to those we have harmed and mending the situation as best we can, and our guilt typically dissipates rather than quickly thereafter. Unpleasant as it is, guilt serves a crucial function in maintaining our individual standard of behavior and in protecting our personal, familial, and community relationship. When our spouse tears up in the middle of a heated argument, guilt makes us soften and reach out. When we are extremely busy and stressed at work and realize we forgot our mother's birthday, guilt swoops to at us until we drop what we are doing and shoot her a highly apologetic email or phone call. And when our friend discovers we revealed something he or she told us in confidence, guilt motivates us to offer a heartfelt apology, a promise of future discretion, and maybe even a nice dinner as compensation. Guilt does so much to protect our most cherished relationship. It practically deserves its own superhero costume and cape. But before we break out At this pandemic, we should consider that not everything guilt does is physiologically beneficial. In the above example, the harm because the other person was mild and our effort to apologize or atone for our error were successful. Therefore, our guilt feeling ceased immediately or at least decreased significantly as a fault. As a result, similarly, when we fail to live up to our own standard, compensating for our wrongdoing and correcting our behavior is usually sufficient to eliminate our guilt substantially, if not entirely. But there are times when our guilty feeling outstay their welcome and become literal squatter in our minds, while guilt can be heroic in small doses. In a larger ones, it becomes a physiological feelings poisoning both our peace of mind and our most cherished relationship. And once the toxins of unhealthy guilt are circulating in our system, extracting the venom is no easy task. Unhealthy guilt and relationship. Although we feel guilty when we violate our personal standards, such a guilt rarely lingers. When we cheat our diet, when we spend too much money, or when we neglect our duties in some way, we might make effort to compensate for our action, but we are rarely traumatized by them. No one wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, consumed with guilt about the chocolate cheesecake they wolfed down last Christmas. When emotional distress about violating our personal standard does linger, it usually endangers feeling of regret rather than guilt. Unhealthy guilt occurs primarily in situations involving our relationship when there are implications for the welfare of others. Unhealthy relational guilt typically manifests in three primary forms, all of which inflict similar physiological wounds. Unresolved guilt, which is the most common and often the most damaging, survivor guilt, and separation guilt. Although there are innumerable events that can elicit rational guilt, one of the main reasons of guilt might remain unresolved is that we are much less skilled at rendering effective apologies than we tend to realize. Another is that even when our apologies are on point, the harm we cause the other person might simply be too great for that person to forgive us, or the person might want to forgive us but simply feels unable to do so. In some situations, circumstances might prevent us from being able to communicate an apology to the person at all. In each of these scenarios, our guilt remains unresolved and unremitting and can quickly become toxic. Some forms of guilt occur without clear wrongdoing on our part. Survivors of war, accident, illnesses, or other tragedies often find it impossible to engage in their life fully because doing so evokes images or memories of those who perished. They might be concerned by questions about why they survived while others did not, or they might feel responsible in some way even though there was nothing they could have done to prevent the event from occurring. Many of those with severe cases or survivor guilt also suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. As such, their survivor guilt is merely a symptom of more complex physiological disorder, and the treatment in this chapter would not be appropriate for them. When survival guilt is related to wars, accident, and other traumatic event, it is best to consult a mental health professional who is specifically trained in the treating PTSD. Survivor guilt is often made worse by circumstances. We might have argued with the sibling just before he was killed in a driving accident, forgetting to call back a friend just before she committing suicide, or insulted a college woman before he was fired. One of the most unfortunate examples of how circumstances can induce survivor guilt involved Waylon Jennings, who was a guitarist for Buddy Holly. Jennings had a seat on Holly's plane the day it crashed, killing all aboard. When he gave up his seat to J.P. Richardson and took the bus because Richardson was sick. If that was not enough to induce survivor guilt, the last exchange Jennings had with Holly was when Holly teased Jennings for having to take the bus by saying, "Well, I hope your old bus freezes up." "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." Jennings later became a star in his own right, but he was forever haunted by incredible survivor guilt, both by Richardson's death and even more so because of his parting words to Buddy Holly. Fortunately, many of the situations that cause survivor guilt are far less traumatic or tragic than Jennings. When we find ourselves more fortunate than others, either because we are doing exceptionally well or because they are faring unusually poorly by comparison, our empathy and conscience can combine to elicit an exaggerated sense of guilt. As a result, we may experience physiological disruption in our life despite no wrongdoing on our part. For example, we might find it difficult to enjoy promotion because our friend and colleague had competed for the same opportunity. We might feel unable to celebrate our engagement to the person of our dreams because our older sibling is still single and unhappy, or we might have trouble celebrating getting into our first choice of colleges because our best friend did not. What makes survivor guilt especially hard to purge is that there are no actions for which we must atone, no relationship return to demand, and no outstanding apologies to be rendered. As such, our guilt serves no relational purpose, and its warning signal considered nothing more than a deafening false alarm that poisons our quality of life. Separation guilt involves feeling guilty about moving forward and pursuing our own life when doing so involves leaving others behind. We might find it impossible to enjoy a night out with our spouse because we feel guilty about leaving our children with a babysitter, even one of whom they are familiar and comfortable. We might feel guilty about living far from our aging parents, even when they are all well cared for. Or we might feel guilty about taking a job or studying overseas when we know how much our families will miss us. This loyalty guilt arises when we feel such a binding ties of loyalty to close family member of trends that pursuing our own goals or making choices that deviate from their norms and expectation makes us feel bad. We worry that our family will perceive our choices as harmful condemnation of their own values and as betrayal of a family loyalty. Such a guilt is especially common around themes of religious practices, and sexual orientation. One mother and I work with turned her lesbian daughter who had just come out and cried, "How could you do this to me?" Her daughter responded by saying, "I'm not doing anything to you. I just want to be happy," and promptly burst into tears while mounting to her mother, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." Family members often feel betrayed in such situations, and fortunately, they often convey their feeling to us in no uncertain term. Of course, many adult children feel just as betrayed by their parent, lack of support and empathy by usually falls more heavily on their shoulder than it does on those of their parent or other family and community member. While the consequences to our relationships should obviously be addressed in such situation, what makes our guilt maladaptive is that it arises in response to another was a healthy desire to express our autonomy to life, to our own life, to make our own choices, and tend to our own emotional and physiological needs, regardless of whether our unhealthy guilt results from wrongdoing on our part or not. The more excessive it is, or the longer it lingers, the more toxic its effect becomes, and the greater the wants it can inflict on our mental health. The physiological ones guilt inflict. Excessive unhealthy guilt causes two types of physiological one, each of which can be poisonous to our quality of life. The first involves the impact guilt has on our individual functioning and happiness. In addition to creating paralyzing emotional distress, guilt seriously hampers our ability to focus adequate attention on our own needs and obligations, and it often causes us to resort to blatant self-punishment. The second is that it wreaks havoc on our relationship. The effects of excessive or unresolved guilt impair our communication with the person we have harmed and limit our ability to relate to him or her in an authentic manner. In addition, its toxic effect often ripple outward and create tension and allegiance that is near entire families, social circle, and even communities. The reasons it is urgent to treat unresolved or excessive guilt is that such a feeling often intensify and devolve into remorse and shame. Once that happens, we begin to condemn not just our action but our entire self, leading to self-loathing, low self-esteem, and depression. In order to treat these two wounds successfully we will need a clear understanding of the impact they have on our life and the damage they inflict on our relationship. Let's examine them in a greater detail. 1. Self-condemnation. How guilt plays what a role with our joy and happiness. Guilt feeling comes in a range of severity. In one lighter side, our guilt can manifest as annoying past that constantly nags at us and tugs at our self-liveness. It can distract us as we labor to attend to our obligation and slow us down as we go about the daily business of our life. It is more suffer from guilt that can consume us, paralyze us, and become the central organizing them of our very existence. Yoshi, a college student, was only a month away from graduating when he came to see me for physical therapy during his spring break. His parent, but physician, had immigrated to the United States from Japan in their early 30s, then struggled to find a job as a clinician and took research position instead. My father says the happiest day of his life was when I was accepted into an Ivy League school with one of the best programs in the country, Yossi explained. They expected me to go straight to Harvard Medical School and eventually open a successful medical practice so I could fulfill the dream they were denied. The pressure his parents' expectations were putting on Yossi was enormous, but as he continued his story, I realized he was far beyond stress. He looked absolutely haunted. I hated Prem from the first class I took. I kept at it for the entire first year, and I did well, but I was miserable. Pre-med was not for me. Medical school is not for me, so I switched major. Only I didn't know how to tell them without breaking their hearts. They have sacrificed so much for me from my education. I just couldn't. I have been lying to them ever since. But I graduated in a few months and then they will know. Jesse covered his face with his hand. I feel so guilty I could throw up. I keep imagining their faces when they find out. Yossi began sobbing. He was unable to speak for several minutes. They have worked so hard to pay for my schooling. I could have gone to a state school and saved them so much money. They think I will be hearing from Harvard any day now. They are going to be crushed, just crushed. Yossi broke into a first round of sobs. I don't know what to do. I can't concentrate. I cannot focus. I cannot study. It's all I can think about. After managing his guilt for 3 years, Yossi could not longer keep it at bay. His guilt feeling now consumed him, screamed at him, and nicked at him, made it impossible for him to ignore their presence any longer. They hampered his ability to concentrate, to focus, to think clearly, and to move forward in his studies. Guilt makes many of us experience mental and intellectual disruption that are so significant we might struggle to meet our basic obligation and to functions at work or in school, until we take steps to address the cause of our guilt or minimize its impact. We will continue to remain at its mercy. Unfortunately, unhealthy guilt does not only make us feel bad, it prevents us from feeling good as well. In one study involving regular college students, scientists were associated with guilt such as blameworthy, culpable, and guilt-ridden on a screen at high speed such that this participant did not perceive the words consciously but were impacted by them nonetheless. A process called priming, a second group of people were primed with words associated with sadness, and a third control group was primed with a neural world. Participants were then asked to indicate how they might spend a $50 coupon, while subjects in the neutral and sadness group allocated most of their fun to things such as music, movies. Subjects who were primed with the guilt-related words chose far less indulgent items such as school supplies. This experiment and others like it serve as testament to guilt's significant party pooping powers, as even subliminal exposure to guilt-related words was sufficient to function as a killjoy for people who were not even feeling guilty at the time. Certainly, when we are in the throes of unrelenting or excessive guilt, it is extremely difficult for us to enjoy our life in any substantial way. Things that used to bring us pleasure, joy, or excitement lose their appeal, not because we no longer enjoy them, but because we no longer permit ourselves to do so. This is especially problematic for people who suffer from various forms of survivor guilt. For example, parents whose children are victims of accident or chronic illness, children and even grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, survivors of other atrocities, and spouses who lose their partners after often feel guilty at the very thought of having fun or indulging themselves in any way. Such extended severe guilt serves no productive purpose other than to unnecessarily diminish our own quality of life. A fight club of one. Another toxic effect of excessive guilt is that we might try to relieve our emotional distress by punishing ourselves for our wrongdoing, consciously and unconsciously, with a self-sabotaging or self-destructive behavior. Some of us even resort to punishing ourselves physically. Self-flagellation has a long and particularly stomach-turning history as the form of atonement, and was especially popular during outbreaks and bubonic plague in the 13th and 14th century in Europe. People believed that publicly whipping themselves with irons or flaying their own flesh would cleanse them from sins and ward off the Black Death. Headbangers aside, for more of us resort to the self-punishment than we might realize. In one study, people who were made to feel guilty by depriving a fellow subject of a lottery ticket were willing to give themselves highly uncomfortable electrical shock, especially when they found themselves in the presence of their victim. In other studies, subjects who were made to feel guilty were willing to keep their hands submerged in freezing water for a painful period of time. What makes such a finding remarkable is that the participants were not warding off the plague. They just felt bad about a fellow student missing out on a few lottery tickets. Seeking a self-punishment when we feel responsible for harming someone whom we are unable to compensate for our action is known as the Dobby effect, so named after the self-punishing house elf in the Harry Potter series. The reason we non-magical creatures resort to such measures, and the reason we might even do so publicly, is that such actions represent a clear signal of remorse. By making others aware of our emotional distress, we redistribute the emotional or physical pain our victim felt, even the score with them, and hopefully restore our standing in our social circle, family, and community. 2. Block relationship. How guilt poisons arteries of healthy communication. Significant guilt poisons the arteries of authentic communication and connection between us and those we have harmed. Even if we don't realize it, unresolved guilt impacts our behavior around the other person, and it usually affects how that person behaves around us as well. In many cases, it also improves order in our social and our family circles, such that the natural flow of authentic communication between all the affected people quickly becomes poison and our relationship becomes extremely strained. The ongoing toxicity of our unresolved guilt in such situation can damage our relationship even more substantial than our original offense did. We often experience guilt in waves, and when it comes to our relationship, the waves are at their highest when we interact with the offended person. In such moment, our guilt can spike so dramatically that it feels like being hit in the face in a dodgeball. Understandably, our natural inclination is often to duck these painful encounters whenever we can. In order to minimize any chance of injuring the person further, we avoid any mention of the guilt-inducing incident itself when interacting with the person and with the other family members. We steer clear of any related topic that might segue into the incident, a list that tends to grow as time goes on. We must also avoid people or places that remind us of our wrongdoings, and eventually we begin making an effort to avoid the person altogether. While such strategies represent ineffective solutions at best, they are all but impossible when the person we have harmed is our spouse. Blake, a stay-at-home dad, and Judy, a pharmaceutical sales representative, initially came to couple therapy to deal with the parenting issues. They had 3 children, 2 of whom were diagnosed with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, and all 3 of whom failed to respond to any effort the parent made to set limit. However, their parent differences were swiftly pushed aside when Blake discovered a text message indicating Judy might have an affair with a co-worker the previous year. He confronted her about it in our next session. Judy was stunned by Blake's abuse, but she confessed to the affair right away. "It was a one-time thing, and I have regretted it ever since," she said. We had a drink after work and it just happened, but it didn't mean anything. It was just a stupid mistake, a terribly stupid mistake. Blake, who had hoped Judy would be able to offer a compelling explanation for the text message, was absolutely shattered. "You slept with another man?" He mumbled, shaking his head in disbelief. "You slept with another man?" Judy's face was a mass of guilt and anguish. "I'm sorry, Blake. I am. But I promise you it meant nothing. It was a mistake, that's all. You have to believe me." Judy was incredibly relieved when Blake informed her that he would decide to stay in the marriage. However, that did not mean he forgave her. In fact, Blake continued to feel so wanted he struggled to think of anything else. Every time Judy looked at him, she saw the terrible hurt in his eyes and she felt incredibly guilty because of it. As the week went by, they began to fall back into their normal pattern and routine, but Blake's pain lingered on and so did Judy's guilt. Judy's job in itself required her to be energetic and positive, and she was able to adopt that mindset when she was at work. But at home she felt oppressed by her guilt. She began working longer hours and made sure to call Blake every 30 minutes to reassure him she was legitimately in her office. She found excuses to avoid family engagement, both with his and with her own family, and she became less involved in the kids' extracurricular activities. I decided to meet with Judy privately to discuss her increasing disengagement. "It's not just your guilt that you are avoiding," I pointed out. "It's your entire marriage." Judy nodded silently, but her guilt had become so overwhelming she simply was not sure whether she could tolerate it much longer. She was desperate to receive forgiveness from Blake, and he in turn was desperate to forgive her and move on, but he simply couldn't. The cycle of hurt, guilt, and avoidance that played out between them devastated their ability to communicate authentically with one another and presented an even greater threat to their marriage than her affair had. When we play dodgeball with our guilt, we rarely win. Tripping on guilt trips. Guilt trips almost always take place in a close relationship, and the most common them in is one of interpersonal neglect. I could be lying here that, and you would be. "No, it's because you never call. If you get the tattoo, it will break your mother's heart. Your father's been wrecked since your argument with him last week." Are common yet benign example of everyday guilt trips that are the bread and butter of many family communication. The main reason we seek to induce guilt in others is to influence their decision and behavior, but guilt trips have a boomerang effect we rarely consider in that, along with guilt, they also induce resentment. In our one survey, 33% of people indicated they felt resentful toward those who make them feel guilty, while only 2% of guilt inducers mention resentment as a potential consequence of their guilt-inducing effort. Indeed, few guilt trippers are aware of the self-defeating consequences of their action. When we are the recipient of the guilt trip, we might respond to a person's charge of neglect by engaging with him. But resentment we typically feel by doing so is likely to motivate us to avoid them even more going forward. Mild as the positions even though of most guilt trips are, over the long term, their toxicity can build and cause our interaction and communication to become superficial and perfunctory, and the quality of our relationship to diminish. How guilt poisons entire families. When our transgression is significant or when the person we harm remains unforgiving, it doesn't take much for the poisonous effect of our guilt and the contamination of the person we hurt to spread to the other member of our family or social circle. All it takes is for one person to take sides and evoke unspoken expectation of loyalty in doing so, and a deep fight is quickly established. Other family members then quickly line up on either side of the rift, poisoning arteries of healthy communication, even further and affecting everyone's to one degree or another. Many of multi-generational family food was birthed in just this way. The most fertile ground, even with this toxic family dynamic play out our family event and religious holiday. Large gatherings create perfect stages upon which 3 or 5 families' greatest hits of past wrongdoing. Of course, aside from inducing powerful guilt is in those who committed the transgression, it creates tension and is divisiveness that can mar even the best planned and most festive event. Similar tension and tests of loyalty are common in workplace, among friends, and in other social circles, such as a recreational sports team. When our guilt is substantial and unresolved, the poison that impairs healthy communication creates trust between ourselves and another person can easily expand and become toxic for the entire group. How to treat the physiological one's guilt inflict. Guilt usually serves an important function by alerting us to when we might have harmed another person or when any actions we are considering might do so. Once we modify our plan of action or atone up for our transgressions, either by apologizing or in some other way, our guilt subsides. Therefore, we do not need to apply emotional first aid treatment in every situation. However, if our offense is serious or if we are already made significant effort to apologize to the person we harm or to atone for our action in other way and our guilt remains excessive, or if we suffer from substantial survivor guilt or separation and disloyalty guilt, emotional first aid is needed necessary. Let's open our medical cabinet and review our treatment options. General treatment guidelines. The most effective way to treat unresolved guilt is to eliminate it at the source by repairing our relationship with the person we have harmed, meaning the rupture and garnering the person's authentic forgiveness will cause our guilt to be diminished significantly and most likely dissolve completely soon thereafter. Treatment A, rendering effective apologies, focuses on how to repair damaged relationship by crafting psychologically effective apologies that can detoxify any ill will the other person still harbor and promote the relationship repair. Treatment B, self-forgiveness, focuses on situations in which the control circumstances prevent a direct apology to be issued, or ones in which it is impossible to repair the relationship for other reasons, and provides other ways to alleviate guilt and reduce self-condemnation and self-punishment. Treatment B is not as effective as treatment A in removing the venom that is at the root of excessive guilt, but it does provide a form of physiological antitoxin that can deliver much needed emotional relief. Treatment C. Re-engaging in life is focused on survivor and separation and disloyalty guilt. Chapter 1 discussed guidelines that for when one should consult a mental health professional. Treatment A. Learn the recipe for an effective apology. In theory, the solution to toxic relational guilt is simple. You render an authentic apology to the person you have harmed and, assuming your sincerity shines through and your transgressions was not too monumental, all will be forgiven, especially with time. However, research demonstrates that in practice, the simple transaction of apology and forgiveness goes awry for more often than we might expect, regardless of the area of our life in which it occurs. Further complicating matter, both physiologically and communication-wise, when our apologies are perceived as insincere, they can actually backfire and make the situation worse, breathing even more poison into an already toxic interpersonal dynamic. The reason this happens so often is that crafting apologies that are effective enough to garner authentic forgiveness is far more complicated than we realize. In fact, until recently, it was far more complicated than most psychologists realized as well. How is it possible that something as basic as an apology be fatal to many of us? After all, most of us are taught to say "I'm sorry" as soon as we can talk. Surely as adults, we should be at least somewhat proficient at offering effective apologies. Also, we are not. Although we are taught when to say "I'm sorry," we are never really taught how to say it, or at least how to phrase it effectively. This exact issue eluded physiology for many years. Hundreds of studies have investigated apologies and forgiveness, but the vast majority of them have examined only if and when an apology was rendered, not how it was articulated nor what distinguished a successful apology from an unsuccessful one. Fortunately, relationship experts and researchers have finally begun to investigate the specific ingredient that to make apologies effective and more likely to elicit authentic forgiveness from the offended party. The recipe for communicating effective apologies. Most of us conceive of apology as including three basic ingredients. 1. A statement of regret for what happened. 2. A clear I am sorry statement. 3. A request for forgiveness, all of which must be delivered with sincerity. Whoa, I completely forgot about our date night. I feel really bad about it and hope you can forgive me. As opposed to, oops, what's that not tonight? Also, each of these ingredients might seem obvious. It is remarkable how often we end up omitting one of them. When I point out such omission to my patients, they often respond as if I am being petty by calling them on a mere technicality. Oh, come on, they often say, I am apologizing, are not it, aren't I? I'm sorry, partly simply. My response is usually to point out that flour is an implied ingredient when we are baking a cake. If we forget to put it in, what we end up with won't look like a cake and it won't taste like a cake either. The analogy is important because we want to apologize. We want our apologies to be effective. We have to follow a clear recipe, and the three items above are not the only ingredients we need to include. Scientists have discovered three additional components that also play a vital role in apologies effectiveness. Validating the other person's feeling, offering atonement, and acknowledging we violated expectation. Let's look at these three additional ingredients and then examine which one of the total of 6 apologies components were present or lacking in the apologies offered by Antonia, Judy, and Yoshi, and how their apologies fared as a result.